Welcome to ILTV Weekly, and back by popular demand for a second week in a row are my guests, Reserve IDF Colonel and former spokesperson in the Prime Minister's office, Miri Eisen, and former and future Knesset member and retired quarterback, Dov Lipman. Well, after having the entire summer off on a paid vacation, the Knesset is back in session, and two issues topping their agenda will be the settlement of Amona and the future of public broadcasting. We will come back to those issues, but we begin with a discussion on the distasteful subject of sexual harassment. Yet again, a leading Israeli male personality has been disgraced by inappropriate sexual behavior. The latest case involves Ari Shavit, an icon of Israeli journalism who was accused by Jewish Journal reporter Danielle Berin of sexual harassment and assault when they met for her to interview him in a hotel lobby about 2 years ago. Shavit has since resigned from Haaretz and Channel 10 TV after admitting his actions and issuing an apology. This is but the latest case. Similar and sometimes criminal actions have been exposed, allegedly carried out by senior army and police officers, rabbis, actors, singers, mayors, and other politicians. And just to remind viewers, former President Moshe Katsav is serving a prison sentence for rape. Before we begin, this comment from Times of Israel blogger Sarah Tuttle-Singer. Has that been your experience that many Israeli men do cross the line?
Some do, and I mean, it's not just Israeli men. Many men have crossed the line, and oftentimes when you say no, they make it very uncomfortable. They either continue to push, and you end up doing something you really don't want to do, or they get angry, and you can be afraid. And I understand very much how Danielle must have felt in that situation where she's with a man who's in an incredible position of power over her. She feels cornered, she feels caged, but at the same time she doesn't want to, in her own words, embarrass him because he is who he is, and she's afraid of how that will reflect on her. I mean, it's very complicated.
Miri, you had a career in the IDF, in the Army, and also in public service. From your experience, how widespread is that? Do the girlfriends tell you about things that happen and not even report sometimes?
I think that Israel is in the same place as the rest of the Western world. I actually don't think it's particularly worse here. As a woman, I can say that unwanted advances, and there are different levels of unwanted advances, I have met worldwide, not specifically in Israel. I think that the Israeli culture, both the machoism, the fact that they do serve in the military, the fact that we do have that aspect of it, makes it perhaps a bit more overt, maybe a bit more touchy. But I want to talk for a moment about the Israeli military. When I was drafted, and I was drafted a long time ago, over 35 years ago, we didn't talk about sexual harassment, and it was totally all over the place. You didn't talk about it, you didn't consider it so, it wasn't considered okay to talk about, and then the military took upon itself to actually come about and protect women. You mean that it was acceptable? It was acceptable, and especially in the positions that we're talking about, where somebody in a place which is a place of power is taking advantage of that place of power over draftee young women. And the military stood up and in the 1980s put out, at the end of the 80s, beginning of the 1990s, draconian new military laws against sexual harassment in ways where I, at that stage along the way already a quite high-ranking officer, would walk into a room and the men would go, "Well, I'm not sure I can shake your hand anymore." And I was like, fine, if that's the way that you understand these new limits that are asking you to keep your hands in the correct place, then that's fine. And it's interesting that after the IDF put in those draconian laws, we've seen a very big change in the IDF. It doesn't mean that there isn't sexual harassment, but it is taken care of very harshly. There are other examples that we haven't mentioned right now, both of high-ranking generals, that it ends their career. And after the IDF did that... It's the fear of the penalty that is stopping it. Absolutely. And you know what? I am fine with that. I don't think that it has to be at this stage, because culturally they understand that it's wrong. Let's start with the fear of the penalty. And after that, they put in very draconian laws in the Israeli parliament, Knesset too. We have very advanced against sexual harassment laws.
Dov, I don't know how to put it except to say, what is wrong with the men? Israeli men in particular in this case, but what is wrong with men?
I don't want to be in a position to speak on behalf of all men, but I will say that...
What is wrong with a lot of men.
Right. Now, I will say that, just building off what Mary said, I'm very proud to live in a country where, even though on the one hand, certainly it's a stain to see week after week, month after month, these stories arising, but that we live in a country which takes it seriously. I can tell you, serving in the parliament, it's something which is taken very seriously, and there are rules and there are guidelines, and to know that there's a president sitting in prison, to know that ministers have to step down, to know that journalists are held accountable, I think that's something which we in Israel have to look at and say we can be very proud of that. And yes, let it be the laws, let it be the fear of punishment which is governing and trying to control people who aren't able to control themselves. But I think that's something which we can be proud of, not proud that it's happening and it's actually a stain for us, but that we enforce it, that we're strict about it, that there's no tolerance for it. I've heard people say to me, it's ridiculous anytime a person makes an accusation. Let it be that kind of a culture where people have to go overboard the other way and make sure that they're not crossing lines that they shouldn't be crossing.
Miri, do women, for the most part, these days feel safe about coming out and speaking about things that have happened to them, or do they still feel as though it's not worth the pain?
It's such an important question that you just asked, and I want to say painfully that I still think that at the end, I am so proud of women who stand up and talk, and at the end they're going to be a victim too. There is no way yet, within any culture, by the way, that I know of, that really knows how to hold and help a woman who's been assaulted, and for that matter, a man who's been sexually assaulted, but let's be honest, it's mainly overwhelmingly against women. In Israeli culture, when you stand up and talk about it, then the crowd's going to come and say, oh, well, she's just making it up, she's making a lie. She goes on trial for who she is.
Because the guy might be very popular.
He may be very popular. She goes on trial for the way she talks or for the way she dresses, and it's her fault. And this issue of blaming the victim is usually the first line of defense in any kind of case like that. And it doesn't matter if it's just talking, because talking can also be sexual harassment. You're not supposed to walk into a room and talk to me as a woman in a demeaning way that has to do, meaning when you step into a room, do I say, oh, look, your nice tie, you changed your hair, you did things. There are things that will be done with women without thinking sometimes that will cross lines.
Not only talking, WhatsApp, email messages.
Absolutely. So I still think that it's very difficult for women to step up. In this case, I would like to see a stronger presence in that sense of law that would protect the women who do stand up without allowing them to do whatever they want. We can't turn this into something where you blame somebody for something that didn't happen. But it's still very difficult anywhere in the world. That isn't just in Israel, but also in Israel.
Rabbi, and I say rabbi, now, obviously Jewish law prohibits that kind of activity, but what about the Bible itself? Were Jewish men in the Bible harassing women?
So I think our Bible is very open and very honest about these challenges, and great righteous people, we see their stories and we see that they're punished for those stories and how they suffer for those stories. I think that we're supposed to look at that and learn from that in terms of how careful we have to be, what safeguards we have to put into place to make sure that we don't put ourselves in those situations. And I want to see the Jewish state not say, oh, we're on par with the rest of the world. I want to say that the Jewish state can lead the world in these areas, and that we can be a country that people can look up to in terms
we're
of
not there right now.
I'm not saying we're there, but we have to aspire towards it, and that should be part of the conversation.
We're not the light
as well.
unto the nations in this case.
But that should be part of the conversation, that we should be aspiring towards that.
Amona, the Israeli outpost overlooking the settlement of Ofra, was founded in 1995 on privately owned Palestinian land. The community has grown, and it's home to 42 families with a population of about 200. Back in 2006, the High Court of Israel ruled that Amona is illegal under Israeli law. In December of 2014, the court ordered that the town must be evacuated and demolished within 2 years. That deadline is now. There are now efforts by right-wing coalition members to block the evacuation. The Jewish Home Party is attempting to bring a controversial bill to recognize the outpost and compensate the Palestinian landowners. The Attorney General calls the bill illegal. Before discussing Amona, let's hear from an Amona resident.
Hi, my name is Manya, and I live here in Amona. I was born in America, in the States, in California, and thank God my parents made Aliyah when I was around 7, so I got spared the Aliyah pains. So I live here with my husband and 5 kids in Amona. Four of them were born here. We've been here for 11 years now. And this is God's land. And there were no Arabs here before us. Nobody was here sitting on this land. Nobody did anything here until we came here 15, 17 years ago. It's an amazing place. We invite you to come and check it out.
Dov, yet again, the government is appealing for the High Court to delay for 6 or another 7 months this unending story. Where is it going? How is it ultimately going to be solved? Is that woman going to still be in Amona 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years from now?
So I don't know how it's ultimately going to be solved. We live in a country that has laws, and there's a lot of emotions involved. I love all the land of Israel. I visit everywhere, and there's biblical significance, religious significance, spiritual significance. We live in a country of laws, and we have to follow those laws. If there are parties in the Knesset that are following those laws and they're appealing to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decides to give them those 7 months, then that's part of the laws as well, and all sides have to play by the same rules. Both sides can try as hard as they can within the framework of the rules, and then we'll see where it goes after that. People often say to me, when I talk about these issues, would you leave your house in Beit Shemesh if somehow the laws of our state said that my apartment building was illegal and I wasn't allowed to live there, that's what I would have to do. It would be painful, it would be difficult. I do believe it's the responsibility of the state to make sure they have another place to go to. No one should be homeless, no one should be living in hotels or caravans. The state should arrange for other places for families to live and for neighborhoods to go to. One last point I want to make. It does bother me, though, when the very same institutions or organizations that go to the Supreme Court, to the courts, to argue against the settlements, then go to international bodies and say the state of Israel is doing all these horrible things. And the president of Israel mentioned this yesterday in the Knesset. You can't have it both ways. You can't use the state institutions and the courts to get people out of their homes, but then when it's not going exactly the way you want, then go to international bodies and say, look at this horrible state of Israel. We all have to play by the same rules, focus within the law, letter of the law, and care for those people, though. Those people might have to leave their homes. Make sure they're taken care of if that happens, but we have to follow the rules of the land.
Well, Miri, there's been enough years to care about the future of those people, to find an alternative. I think we all would sympathize with that family, that woman and her family's plight, and the other 40-some families, 200 people that they'll have to relocate. But that's the law. Doesn't that have to be the bottom line, that they have to go?
So when we talk about the law, I think it's a little more murky, because the laws of the State of Israel are not applied to Area C, which is where the people of Amona live. In Area C, what they've done, there's a loop, the loop as I like to call it, where Israelis who live inside Judea and Samaria and Area C live according to Israeli laws, but Israel never applied, the Knesset never annexed. That's part of that issue of that murkiness of being in between. Now, because you have a gray area where at the end of the day, it's not even the Ministry of Defense, it's the Israeli Defense Forces or the Central Command are the sovereign on behalf of the State of Israel inside these areas, so it's even more challenging, because at the end of the day, when we're still in a harsh conflict with the Palestinians. We have not resolved it. We're not talking here about that side of it. We're looking here at Manya, who lives in a beautiful spot, but we are also within an arena where these areas are under agreements that the State of Israel, not the Knesset, the State of Israel, the government of Israel, signed with a counterpart, with the Palestinians, to go into a process. So it also has to do with that greater picture. So the fact that the Palestinians both can petition the Israeli Supreme Court and also go to international communities and say, look, they're not implementing their own law, that's called using all of the tools of the trade. I don't admire it, but I understand what they're doing, and I'm going to be rude to myself as an Israeli. We do the exact same thing, only when we do it, we're a sovereign state, and we're a member, and that's okay. But we use different tools that are out there.
My issue, by the way, was more with Jewish organizations that are helping the Palestinians in this cause and playing both sides of it.
I understand you, Dov. And as you said before that you're proud of Israel, that in sexual harassment we're in front of other countries, I want to be proud of Israel that when it comes to the rule of law, we're not only looking at ourselves, but we're looking at that broader issue. There are people there. There's no question whatsoever that when they come to the Israeli Supreme Court, by the way, anybody can petition the Israeli Supreme Court. We are very unique in the world in that sense. You don't have to be a citizen. You don't even have to be the one who was injured. You have to show that you can come and petition in many different ways. But when when we come back to the people in Amona itself, Amona at the end is part of, to me, policies and politics in Israel which are not above the law and they're not beyond the law, but it's part of the reasons that it's not being resolved. It is not the only example of breaking the law, both in Israel and in Judea and Samaria. Amona is just one case of it.
Well, let me ask you about the politics of the issue. The Jewish Home Party, Naftali Bennett, this is a do or die issue for them. They're not going to allow Amona to be evacuated when they have the Justice Ministry and they have control, really, of the future of the coalition. A lot of Likud people agree with them. Is this an issue that, if they are ultimately forced to remove the settlement, the outpost, can cause a collapse of the coalition?
I'll say this. I don't know that they're going to pull out of the government over that. If I was advising Naftali Bennett, and I have to take off my Yesh Atid opposition hat for the moment, where we're eager to see the government collapse, I would tell him, you have to leave the government over that issue. If you want to be able to be the flag bearer of the Israeli right and say, we will never let any settlements be evacuated, there has to be some red line which you won't accept. Having said that, my guess is, and being in the Knesset these last few days and seeing some of the maneuvering, the goal is going to be delays, punting as much as possible, not having to confront the issue because no one wants to be faced with that challenge. I always feel that not taking steps hurts Israel. This waiting game that we play on all of these issues actually hurts us internally, hurts us externally, and doesn't get anyone anywhere. And these people living there, like Manya, are living there without knowing what their future is going to be. So I think that it would be much better to have leadership which says, here's where we're going with this, instead of just playing the waiting game.
We're just about out of time, but staying on this issue, you worked in the Prime Minister's office for years. This is a tough one for Netanyahu, is it not? I mean, he believes in the land of Israel. He sort of positions himself as a friend of the settlement movement. How's he going to get out of this?
I think that the delays is one of the ways to do so. But at the end, who's going to make him do it? And I leave that also with a question mark, that in the rule of law, when a government and a coalition don't want to do something, they have a lot of ways to make sure that it doesn't happen.
All right, we're moving on to the issue of public broadcasting. And for the sake of transparency, I will mention that 1 year ago today, I left Israel Television after 20 years of service in the Israel Broadcasting Authority. I was and remain opposed to the decision several years ago, led by Minister Gilad Erdan and enthusiastically supported by Finance Minister Yair Lapid, to close the Broadcast Authority and replace it with a new public broadcasting entity. After a series of delays, the new entity says that it is ready to replace the IBA in January. But in recent days, many millions of shekels later, Prime Minister Netanyahu has vowed to cancel the new entity and rebuild the existing broadcast authority, which has remained on the air in a state of liquidation. Dov, looking back, in retrospect, do you think that Yair Lapid, who I know you support on most issues, was correct in his decision to dismantle the Broadcast Authority?
I think that it was
support.
Right. I think it was correct to dismantle and rebuild, meaning the idea of having public broadcasting I think is important. I think that there were many, many issues which were talked about in the various committees, and the feeling was we can't fix what we have right now. We have to build something new. What bothers me more at this moment is the complete lack of any direction and the feeling that it's all politics. I can tell you, during the last Knesset, there wasn't that feeling between Minister Erdan from Likud and Yesh Atid that there was a political maneuver happening here. I sensed a real sincerity to try to improve public broadcasting in Israel.
What we resented was the glee in which Lapid presented the case. That caused a lot of resentment.
That I can understand. The human side of it for sure, and I understand that there was a lot of personal emotion involved for people who were working there. But now, when I go to the Knesset, it sounds just like a political discussion. It's what's better politically, and no one's discussing what's better for Israel. I haven't heard any sound argument about what is best for Israel. There's a lot of accusations. The Prime Minister wants to have control over it. People want to make sure he doesn't have control over it. Instead of taking a step back and having an honest discussion,
What's
what
best
is
for the
best
public?
for the public? And that's something which is frustrating.
Well, Miri, again, putting on your hat as a person who worked in the Prime Minister's office, here's Netanyahu that supported this project just a couple of years ago, who supported the new entity through millions. I read a figure today that it's reached $1 billion shekel in forming the new entity. And then just months before they're ready to go on the air, he does this turnaround, reportedly because too many of the people in the new entity are of a political persuasion that he doesn't like. Is that even conceivable?
I am in the country where Prime Minister Netanyahu, from the 1990s, which means that it's really for over 20 years, is in a privatizing mode. We're living in a country where the state of Israel over the last 30 years has sold off everything that it used to own, and the public broadcasting, I'm not saying it's the last one of the things, but look at all the different things that we used to have that have become private, that used to be owned by the country and were run by the country, including public broadcasting. And I have to put it into the Israeli way of thinking. We didn't like the unions, we made the new unions. We have a Histadrut and a Histadrut Chadasha. We don't like the way that the labor unions were working in the ports. We have the ports, and we're going to build the new ports that are going to break the old ports. And then we have the public broadcasting. We don't like the way that they work. We don't like the way they do. We'll build a better, different one. I'm like, I don't like that on any level. I don't have anything good to say that on any level. I think that things that are bad in that sense, public broadcasting is never something which is economically sound. It is not something that you do because you do it because it's the right thing. You have to step back. You have to let it run. So I may not like NPR. I'm glad it's out there. I can honestly say I detest much of the BBC. It's incredibly important in what it does.
I can honestly say that in the 25 years that I worked at IBA, and I was editor-in-chief of IBA News for many of those years, on 2 occasions did I get a call in all of those years from a government minister or ministry asking or almost demanding that I broadcast a particular thing, and both times we said no.
And Steve, I just want to remind you that at the end you guys did 10, 15 minutes, 20 minutes a day.
25.
We have, okay, 25 minutes when inclusive, but we're talking about the different news stations that are there, the type of public broadcasting. Public broadcasting, Reshet Bet, Reshet Aleph.
Everyone
There are
gets
all
their
sorts of
news from
different things.
Reshet Bet every morning.
And in that sense, it's like, to me, it's also similar. As I said, you cancel things. When I was in the military, the then 25 years ago, Chief of Staff decided to cancel Galei Tzahal. Right now, Miri Regev, different people, constantly want also to cancel the Army broadcasting. To me, it's part of that whole aspect. I think that public broadcasting, if it doesn't toe to the line, then it threatens me, and I'm paying government money. How can it be I'm paying government money for somebody to be criticizing me? And I'm like, yeah, guys, that's called democracy. Take a deep breath. They're not going to always like you. But there is that question because we've had a change of culture.
Well,
inside
at least we
Israel.
got rid of that tax that nobody liked to pay.
That
for
was
the
a good
nation.
part.
So let me ask you this: as a Knesset member and a former Knesset member, but somebody who's certainly in contact with what's going on there, they now have 200 people approximately that have been hired by this new entity. About 1,000 people left in the old Broadcast Authority. Netanyahu is saying he wants to cancel those 200 people and rebuild what's left of the Broadcast Authority. And now you sort of have people trying to figure out which side they are on politically, because they can't be against the old Broadcast Authority because they were nice guys and, Histadrut members and everything else, and they can't be against the new entity because Netanyahu doesn't like them politically, so they like them. So where's the solution there?
So, I'm hearing about negotiations of, again, trying to revamp the old one. Okay, we'll fire 300 people. The discussion has reached a point where I feel we've lost complete perspective on what this is all about. And everyone is exactly like you said. They're trying to find the politically expedient solution. How can we make everyone happy? Instead of asking the question, what's best for Israel? The worst part of the situation, from my perspective, is that the Prime Minister is also the Minister of Communications. I think that creates a scenario where no one can have any real objectivity, and I think that if that was separated somehow, and there was a minister who was fighting for what he wanted, and the Prime Minister, and there was some kind of a compromise that was made, people can understand that process. But right now, it smells of something which people don't like, and I think that's the biggest problem. No matter how this ends, people will feel that it was a political maneuver and not what was best for Israel.
Final word, Miri?
I think that we're losing out on so many different levels, and including for our viewers, the issue of public diplomacy. At the end, it was one of those places where you tuned in and you heard Israel. And I adore the program that we're doing here and other things, but at the end, you want to have that BBC, that NPR, what they're saying in public broadcasting. And by doing what they're doing right now, we're just losing out.
Okay, well, we're out of time for today, and here we are 1 week away from the U.S. presidential election, and not one mention of either Trump or Clinton. Oh, there, I mentioned them. I promised to mention it. 1 week from today, Election Day in the U.S., just in case anyone was wondering why we're not discussing that yet, because everyone else is. We heard about Israel today. Well, that's all the time we have for this week. Thanks for being with us. Thanks too to my guests, Colonel Miri Eisen and Rabbi Dov Lipman. Until next week, I'm Steve Leibowitz, and this has been ILTV Weekly.